Well, quantitatively speaking, President Duterte has maintained very high approval ratings. So you're looking at the 80 to 90% in terms of gross and, more than 60% in terms of net approval and trust rating for the president. So that's quite impressive for him. Although, of course, you have to keep in mind that this is still the honeymoon period. In the Philippines, this extends up to 1 year. So this is a period whereby you have supermajority of people giving trust and confidence to their political leadership. So his numbers are higher than his predecessors, but not too high for us to think that this is extraordinary. Nonetheless, I think the quality of support has changed, because in the first few months, it was a very passionate, I would even say fanatic support for the president. It was almost impossible for us intellectuals and people in the media to criticize him without getting, death threats and intimidation, among others. But now it's quite different. I think the quality of the support has changed in the sense that people are saying maybe he was not the kind of messiah we thought he was, that he's going to change everything overnight. He promised to get rid of crime and drugs in 6 months, but still we have to give the guy a chance. He needs maybe more time in order to effectuate and implement, structural reforms to take the Philippines through the valley of tears of the kind of foundational changes that are necessary to make the country have a much more inclusive kind of economic development and political system. Well, generally the thing with the populists is that they have certain tricks up their sleeve, right? With your business as usual politicians, after a year, people are going to begin to sour and they're going to say, where are all the promises that you gave us? With the populists, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Duterte, among others, their trick is that they can always blame the so-called establishment if something goes wrong. If you remember, both Duterte and Trump run on a anti-establishment kind of slogan, rejecting everything that the establishment was standing for. And their definition of the establishment is very amorphous. It could involve anyone. It could be the media, it could be intelligentsia, it could be foreign powers, it could be political opposition, it could be their predecessors. So whenever something goes wrong, populists have someone to blame. And the fact of the matter is that President Duterte has a very effective also propaganda machine. He has a huge support base, a lot of them volunteers, some of them are professionals. And then, of course, you have the usual organs of propaganda of the state. They're doing a very good job of, for instance, dominating the social media. The social media is completely dominated by supporters of the president. And that is why I think President Duterte, as long as he just does just good enough, just something to show, he can extend his honeymoon period beyond the 1 year period. And of course, if things go wrong, he can always say, oh, this is because of the sabotage of the elite and the establishment against me. And he can do that quite convincingly. And he has done that quite convincingly. Well, one thing that unifies everyone is this. What is the president thinking about? What is the president going to do next? So while the Philippines is still technically a democracy, although increasingly illiberal democracy rather than a liberal democracy, in light of concerns over human rights and basic civil liberties and freedom of expression, the fact of the matter is that we also have some sort of a strongman system. President Duterte is still a democratically elected president. There's still certain levels of checks and balances. But everyone now in Manila is asking, what is the president going to do next? Few people ask about what are the cabinet members going to do, what are the mayors and governors going to do, what are the business movers and shakers going to do. So in that sense, everyone shares the same topic. At the end of the day, we all talk about what Duterte is going to do next. That's where you see some similarity. But there is also a gap. If you talk to the liberal intelligentsia, the much more elite sections of the society, you see much more critical sentiment. The idea that, does he know what he's doing? This war on drugs, for instance, is, really bad for the Philippines' public relations. I deal a lot with the investment community and diplomatic community, and this war on drugs is a big issue. Well, if you talk to the ordinary folks, if you look at the surveys, 8 out of 10 Filipinos support this war on drugs, at least in principle. Although in terms of method, more than 70% of Filipinos are saying maybe the methods should change. So there are concerns about extrajudicial killings and other kinds of concerns with human rights violation. Nonetheless, I think that people are still behind the president by and large. While if you look at the liberal sections of the elite, they're very critical of the president. And they believe that, you even have certain discussion that this president could be ousted out of power anytime soon. But I don't see any basis for that. But this is the discussion you hear from certain people in the media and the intelligentsia, and even some in the business community. Well, I mean, one of the biggest misunderstanding about Mr. Duterte is that people think he's pro-China, anti-American, so on and so forth. But I think that's a very simplistic, if not an erroneous way of looking at things. I think President Duterte just came into power with a lot of common sense. He's not your most sophisticated guy when it comes to rhetoric. I mean, just to put it euphemistically. But the fact of the matter is that he realized that a country like the Philippines, in an increasingly post-American world, has to be much more pragmatic and transactional in its relationship with the great powers. So under his predecessors, particularly President Benigno Aquino, the Philippines and U.S. had this special bond, and there was this presupposition that the two allies have almost perfect convergence of strategic interests. Now, with President Duterte, it's basically this: which superpower offers the Philippines more benefits? And whoever that is, at this particular point in time, we're going to have a better relationship with them. So he changed the relationship from a special bond with the U.S. into a more transactional one. That is revolutionary. Nonetheless, the idea that he's going to literally separate from American and the Philippines cooperation, security cooperation, and military alliance with the U.S. Discounts the basic fundamental fact that the security establishment in the Philippines is very much aligned to America. More than 70% of the weaponry of Philippines comes from America. Much of its intelligence, much of the training, logistical support comes from the Americans. There is a degree of overdependence, but to think that you can just do away with that overdependence by moving to Russia and China misses the whole point. And that is why President Duterte, for instance, has implemented the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. All the basic agreements that tie the two allies are still there. They're not gone. And that's precisely because you have insiders with orthodox thinking, including Duterte's chief foreign policy advisor, former President Ramos, who used to be also the head of the military and the defense ministry. You have people like Delfin Lorenzana, the current defense minister. These are very much insiders who see China as still a threat and believe that America is the best hedging bet. The Americans are the best insurance policy that the Philippines got in order to make sure that it has a backup option if things go south with China. So you have a kind of a good cop, bad cop situation here, right? Whereby President Duterte says all of these good things about China. The Chinese love us. They're giving us economic support, downplaying the disputes in the South China Sea. And then you have people like Delfin Lorenzana and people within the security establishment playing up the threats from China in both the South China Sea and in the Benham rise in the past few days. So the outcome of that is slight downgrade in military cooperation with the U.S. So the Karat, Fiblex, those joint military exercises that were targeted at China have now been scaled back. But the foundation of the relationship is still there because you have these insiders within the military establishment who constantly remind the president not to lose track of things, to keep the insurance policy intact. So the outcome is a compromise. And the compromise is the Philippines has diversified slightly towards China, but the relationship with the U.S. is still there. Not to mention, if the Donald Trump administration continues to have a softer position on the human rights situation in the Philippines, it's likely that a strategic reset or a new strategic compact could be on the horizon between the U.S. And the Philippines. So Trump and Duterte can reset the relationship, and if China doesn't give the Philippines any compromise in the South China Sea or engages in a unilateral provocative action, don't be surprised if suddenly Duterte swings in a completely opposite direction. So this is a very fluid situation. It's essentially constant dynamic balancing. This is what's happening with Philippine foreign policy right now. That's definitely how Duterte puts it, right? We have the same personality. He said we're both foul-mouthed, although Trump is not as foul-mouthed as Duterte. But, there's a sense that both of them are this anti-establishment, strongmen, populists, who have to stand strong, So there's a lot of, I would say, psychological bromance going on between these two guys. But the fact of the matter is that it all goes down to what will America put on the table. So far, for Duterte, the signals have been fantastic. You had Rex Tillerson, during his confirmation speech in the Senate, constantly refusing to categorize Duterte as a human rights violator when he was grilled by Marco Rubio and other senators vis-a-vis the war on drugs in the Philippines. He skipped, for the first time, this has not been done in the past, the annual human rights report and assessment of the State Department. President Trump is not really known as an advocate for human rights is more known as an art of a deal guy who wants to make pragmatic arrangement with other countries. So there is a sense that under Trump, we could have a Reagan-esque foreign policy whereby strategic interests will be put above human rights and democracy issues. And Reagan is in the sense that the US needs to push back against China and reassert its primacy in the region. And that will inevitably involve improving security cooperation with the US because Filipino bases are so strategically located close to where the action is, in the Spratlys, in the Scarborough Shoal. So if Trump wants to ramp it up in the South China Sea, he will have to improve relations with the Philippines to get that necessary basing access. And in exchange, for sure, Duterte will ask America to take a softer line on the human rights issues and continue support for the Philippine law enforcement agencies and continue to give the Philippines economic and military aid that it has been dependent upon. So a lot of backdoor negotiations are going to happen under the Trump and Duterte administration. So it's beyond bromance. There's going to be also a lot of cold-hearted calculation involved there. Well, as we know, there's a lot of expectation that there will be some sort of a diplomatic breakthrough this year, whether in terms of the negotiation of a code of conduct or a framework of a code of conduct in the South China Sea, and also in terms of creating a more robust multilateral mechanism to fight against emerging threats like ISIS, for instance, possibility of ISIS looking at the establishment of a distant caliphate here in Southeast Asia, particularly in the troubled region of Mindanao in the Philippines, the home island of Duterte. And of course, third, how will the ASEAN concretely move towards establishment of the foundation of a common market? And not much development has taken place over the past few years. So there should be a lot of movement on all of those fronts. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that right now, I think the ASEAN and the chairman of the ASEAN, the Philippines, are in this kind of a twilight zone because the Philippines itself is divided. The president wants to make the South China Sea issue much more secondary and more focused on terrorism and the war on drugs now on an ASEAN level, and also talk about economic integration and infrastructure development together with China, while people within the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs, people within the Philippine Media and Intelligentsia, in the security establishment, want the Philippines to leverage its chairmanship to put the South China Sea issue front and center. So now you have this internal debate going on in the Philippines. So on the surface, everything seems to be fine. It's just that no one knows what's going to happen. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of jostling happening there. And we saw already we got a kind of taste of that earlier this year when the ex-Foreign Secretary, Perfecto Yasay, said that the arbitration issue, the Philippines landmark arbitration case against China, could be put on the table, or at least there were 1, 2, or 3 countries who wanted to put that on the table, and I suspect he's talking about Vietnam, Singapore, and possibly Indonesia, along with Philippines. And then you had President Duterte openly saying, no, we're not going to put the arbitration issue on the table. So it just shows the tensions that are there. Personally, I don't have very high expectations of much happening this year, but the fact of the matter is that expect a lot of effort on the part of the Philippines and other ASEAN countries to at least show that they're trying to achieve something. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that that the draft of a COC has already been finalized. I have seen no details on that, but I won't be surprised to see a watered-down version of a framework of a COC being finalized at the end of this year. Personally, I'd rather have the Philippines negotiate under minilateral kind of a strategy for a code of conduct with other ASEAN claimant states. So maybe Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia can sign a code of conduct, a full-fledged code of conduct among themselves, and then pressure the Chinese to come along. And of course, I think there could be some important developments on creating multilateral mechanisms in terms of intelligence sharing and joint patrols, among others, as far as dealing with Abu Sayyaf, ISIS affiliates, and the prospect of a distant caliphate in the Philippines is concerned. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the ironies, right? I mean, generally, the Philippines has been the harbinger of liberal values. The Philippines played a very crucial role in the development of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So liberalism is very much part of the fabric of Philippine society and Philippine foreign policy since the end of Second World War. So now you have a complete change in the Philippines' international image and in Philippines' posturing. So now you have a president in the Philippines who wants to export its own scorched earth model of dealing with issues like drugs and criminalities. And that is creating a lot of concern among the human rights community and civil society groups and in the international community in general. Now, the thing is this, 8,000 people have been killed reportedly. But when a Korean businessman was allegedly kidnapped and killed by Filipino policemen themselves, according to reports, that's when the president realized that he should not give a carte blanche to the law enforcement agency. So there was a temporary pause. Now there's a return to the war on drugs, but it seems to be different. I don't want to be over-optimistic here, but I think the president has realized that, that window of opportunity for him to have a complete carte blanche, blank check to do whatever he wants when it comes to war on drugs, that window is closing down. Now there's more scrutiny, there's more pushback from the Senate, from the media, from the international community. So I expect the president to take a much more judicious approach, at least by Duterte standards, when it comes to dealing with the issue of drugs. So now it's going to be more focused on high-value targets. Now it's going to be much more surgical. So the Oplan Tokang, which was essentially a policeman knocking on the door, and that's where a lot of things went wrong, that has been also modified. So you have now members of the civil society, members of the church going along with the police when they're conducting these door-to-door kind of search operations to check whether they're drug users or drug traffickers in the area. So now I think there's a tremendous amount of pushback. Casualties are still there. There are still dead people piling up on the streets. But the fact of the matter is that the numbers have dramatically decreased if you look at the average over the past month or so. And I think the president is also realizing that the Filipino people want the president to focus on other things. I mean, surveys always show that the number one issue for Filipinos tends to be issues like inflation, like employment and poverty and education. So as much as people want the president to deal with issues like criminality and drugs, they want him now to focus on other important issues. And if the Philippines' image deteriorates, if investors pull back, that will undermine the ability of the president to deal with those more fundamental issues. So now the public pressure is also on the president to diversify his portfolio and focus on anything aside from drugs. So people want him to focus on build, infrastructure, jobs, poverty alleviation. So I think hopefully these things could collectively push the president to adopt a much more judicious and humane approach to dealing with the issue of drugs and criminality.